I'd like to start with an anecdote, a story that illustrates some of the deep themes of a shattered peace. It was almost 30 years ago, well, really to the day, that I arrived in Yugoslavia, where I was the New York Times bureau chief for Eastern Europe. I was based in Belgrade, and I decided to take a tour of my territory, Yugoslavia, and I went for a drive up the Yugoslav coast, the Adriatic coast, from Split and Zadar up towards the north, towards the Italian frontier, and just short of Trieste, we stopped the car and we noticed a beautiful little stone cottage. It was up on a hill overlooking the Adriatic. And there was an old woman working in the garden in front of it. It was a beautiful setting, and we stopped and we went up to talk to her, and she invited us into the house in the garden and made us a coffee. And I said to her, look, tell us your life story, if you would. And she said, well, I'm somewhere over 90 years old, so I'm not sure exactly how long, but mind you, this was in 1977, so she went back easily to the 19th century. She said, and I've lived in 6 countries since I've traveled. I've lived in 6 countries since I was born. I said, Mike, you traveled quite a lot, I guess. She said, no, actually, I never moved from this one stone cottage where I was born. And she lived in 6 countries. Today, there will, of course, be a 7th country. And her life is really, of course, of the last century in that part of the world. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, of course, more briefly into Italy, then the Free State of Trieste. I'm reading up here to keep track of all of them. Then the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, then the Ustashi-led, Nazi-dominated state of Croatia, then the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, and today, of course, it'd be a 7th, the nation Republic of Croatia. And in fact, it's interesting, last fall, Louise has an annual Global Creative Leadership Summit, and I chaired one of the panels last fall, and one of my fellow panel members, was the president of Croatia, and I told him this story. He said, you know, it's true. He said, if things had gone differently, he said, we might have had a nation like this going all the way back, and now we're a free, prosperous, very strong nation. We have just become a member of the European Union. We're about to become a candidate member of NATO. We finally have achieved something that's very important. We've achieved a national identity of our own. And that's really a story that helps explain the origins of this book, A Shattered Peace. Over the past 40 years, I've visited more than 50 countries, and as a foreign correspondent, each place I went, I would ask people, where did they think the principal problems of their country began? What was the origin? Where did things, if you will, begin to go off the rail? And I thought they would say the Second World War, or the Cold War, or in Asia maybe the Vietnam War, the Korean War. But the thoughtful ones, people really thought about this for a while. They said, you know, I really think I'd have to say it goes back to World War I, to the Versailles conference there. The whole world was restructured, and that's where things really began to go off the rails. Now, as I wrote this book, and I'm not a real believer in sort of a single causation theory of history. I think that's too simplistic. But I do think that there are certain turning points that really changed the future of the world. There was, of course, the Congress of Vienna back in the 19th century, and 100 years later, there was the Versailles Conference. Now we're nearly 100 years after that. In fact, next spring will be the 90th anniversary of the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. Each one of these set the world on a path that it was able to retrace only at the cost of, enormous cost of bloodshed, thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of lives. And that's really very sad. You know, I tell very often, I'm asked by young people who leave college what kinds of paths they should pursue when leaving school. And I say, well, you know, really, when you come out of college, you have a whole panoply of a whole host of paths you can take. And once you start off down one path, it kind of closes off a whole lot of other paths. And if you realize after you've gone down this path for a while, you've made a mistake, it's only to get back up to the starting point with great difficulty. And really, that's what happened to the world. The peacemakers of Versailles, they set the world up in so many different parts of this world, each of which I tried to explore in this book. And they set off down this path, and they were the wrong paths. And only now we're really beginning to try to retrace those steps and come back to the starting point. And hopefully we'll have a better chance to do this in the future. That's the price we're paying today. I'd like to read one page, the opening page of the book. and it will perhaps give you a chance. I like to tell people to read the first few pages of the book each book. So I'll make it easy for you. I'll read the first of those few pages. Spring in Paris, a brilliant Tuesday, May 13, 1919. At 4 o'clock, the city is still bathed in that crystal light that washes every building clean, even the aging but elegant townhouses in the city's fashionable 16th arrondissement. There, on the Rue Miteau, President Wilson has gathered the leaders of the 4 victorious allies. World War I is over, and now these statesmen are remaking the world in their own image. The issue today is Iraq, carving what will become a new nation out of the sands of Mesopotamia. The brilliant young British diplomat, Harold Nicholson, has been cooling his heels in the anteroom, engraced in a picture of Dorian Gray, when suddenly a door flies open and he's summoned into the presence of the leaders. He picks up the story in his extraordinary diary. A heavily furnished study with my huge map on the carpet. Bending over it, bubble, bubble, toil and trouble, Clemenceau, Lloyd George, and P.W., President Wilson. They have pulled up armchairs and crouched low over the map. They are cutting the Baghdad Railway. Clemenceau said nothing during all of this. He sits at the edge of his chair and leans his 2 blue-gloved hands down upon the map. More than ever does he look like a gorilla of yellow ivory. It is appalling that these ignorant and irresponsible men should be cutting Asia Minor to bits as if they were dividing a cake. Isn't it terrible, the happiness of millions being discarded in that way? Their decisions are immoral and impracticable. These 3 ignorant men with a child to lead them. The child, I suppose, is me. Anyhow, it is an anxious child. So, which leads us, of course, into Iraq. And we're coming up, in fact, the day after tomorrow, and the 5th anniversary of the American invasion of Iraq. It's a sad and unfortunately bitter anniversary that we're marking. But first you have to remember the principles that Wilson brought with him to Paris. It was the core of these 14 points, and this was the rationale under which the U.S. entered the war in Europe, the First World War, and sent the wars to Europe. And the core of that was self-determination. In effect, it was democracy. But Wilson did leave himself a bit of wiggle room in terms of defining that. What he really wanted was national boundaries of governments to be determined by what people wanted in these regions. His European counterparts, Lloyd George of the UK, Britain's Clemenceau, Louise Orlando, they wanted something else. What they wanted was territory, hegemony, the right to determine the nature and chart the course of vast areas of the world that mattered deeply for various reasons to each of them, each for their own empires or their own systems and means of keeping control of large swaths of the world territory. In fact, they came to, it's very interesting, they came to Paris and declared themselves the world's government while they were meeting them. They were the government of the world, which is a fairly arrogant thing to consider themselves, but that's what they considered themselves, and they began dividing it all up.